Welcome to ArtBeat, Canada's Art Pulse. I'm your host, Katie. In today's episode, we enter the emotive world of Katie Butler. Katie shares how transitions and trials have shaped her expressive style, inviting us into the delicate dance of vulnerability and authenticity in her work, enriched by personal symbols and intricate details. She discusses her technique of transforming complex emotions into visual stories through color and light, highlighting the balance between vulnerability and broader social reflections in her work. As we explore her creative process and the impact of her art, join us for an intimate glimpse into Katie's pursuit of connection through painting. Katie, hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks.
Good. Welcome to the podcast. I'm very happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, Katie, I would like to start by hearing more about where your background of being an artist came from, because I understand that you have a bit of family history. And so I would like to hear about your family's history in visual arts and storytelling and how that's influenced the themes or techniques that you explore in your art.
So on my mom's side, art is pretty huge in that side of the family. It comes from my nonna on the Italian end of things. I have a lot of Italian relatives over in Italy who do art adjacent creative things. And then my nonna, she was born, I think, in, 19 but she was living throughout the 1930s. Like that was like her youth, her time, and working during the 19th. And she would do illustrations before there was like a common printing press. So like all of those like newspaper articles where you see the ads illustrated in, she was doing a lot of that kind of freelance work. She painted dolls at a doll factory for a time. She had like a lot of odd jobs growing up in illustration. And one time even, I think it was Chrysler wanted her to draw diagrams for them.
Oh, wow.
They were arguing with her mom to ask if she could leave high school to draw diagrams for them. So she's always very creative, always coloring, drawing, doing lots of like storybook illustrations. And I think that passed on to her kids, because I have an uncle who does like marine nautical paintings that are very historically accurate. And he lives in the States and does a lot of like American history paintings. He has his paintings in a lot of different like museums and stuff like that. And then my mom also did art, and she did more like figurative portraiture type of style of work. And then there's other relatives here and there, like my aunt does a lot of knitting and crocheting, and all of them are very creative. So arts and crafts was a very, very big thing. And one of my favorite parts of growing up with that kind of like artsy side of my lineage is that they would always do bedtime stories that were like made from scratch. Right. So I feel like people who have like nonnas that are very good at cooking, they have like that as something that's like super homey for them. They're like, oh yes, nonna's cooking just reminds me of home. For me, it's like nonna's bedtime stories is what reminds me of my parents and grandparents. So yeah, she used to always write little like stories. She would draw our guardian angels and give them names and do little cartoons of what our guardian angels were up to. And then when I was younger, my mom would she drew a book called Katie's Curls, because I was one of the only siblings with curly hair. And I guess it was like a lot to maintain. She has very straight hair, so she wasn't sure what to do with it. And she drew a little cartoon book that like, I don't even know where they are these days. I need to go find those. But she drew a cartoon book that had my hair just grabbing things around the house and collecting it up into like a giant hair. And so those are just so cute and enjoyable. And I just loved getting to see myself in these little stories growing up, and like those creative ways of expressing yourself and sharing it with others.
Something else that I learned, you said you're a bit Taylor Swifty with your paintings. And that you incorporate a lot of personal symbols into them. So could you tell us what the process is behind choosing which symbols or Easter eggs to include in your art?
I think that a lot of my paintings, people will be surprised how much emphasis I put into the story behind it and the name and like the little winks that are hidden inside of it. And I think I get so excited by those things that it will motivate me to even make the painting in the first place, is so that I can include this little like nod in there. And so that's why I say Taylor Swiftie, like a lot of the things that she does where she'll include secret numbers or small details in the background that hint to future future like songs or things like that. Those little mastermind-esque details are stuff that I just love to do. I just find it so clever and cute, and it leaves a little bit of extra exploration when you're looking at a painting and you can find little details in the back. So yeah, I just love to do that.
Are there any symbols that you use that are particularly meaningful to you, or are they different with every painting?
It's pretty different with each painting. A lot of the times I'll do callbacks to the title or callbacks to the meaning of the painting. So one of the most recent paintings that I did of the one of the ladies' room, the bathroom scape. That one, when I was looking for what I wanted it to be about, what I wanted to include, and just the general mood of it, was looking at tarot cards and different tarot card meanings. And one of the tarot card meanings is the Three of Cups. And I had at the time 3 girls who had agreed to pose for me for the reference photo shoot. And I knew I wanted to have them in the bathroom having like a little, almost like seance, but not as creepy. Like it is a playful witchcraft in the bathroom. And I knew that I wanted to have them do like a little tarot reading. And I knew with the tarot reading, there was going to have to be one card flipped. And that's kind of what I mean by the Taylor Swiftiness, is that it would kill me to just have the card exist there and it just be whatever random card they flipped.
Right.
Like I'm like, if I have something that has that kind of significance in it, I need to make it significant. So I ended up photoshopping into the reference the Three of Chalices card. And then I had them all cheersing their cup as well, so that it's like kind of mirroring the Three of Cups with the 3 girls cheersing their 3 cups. And the Three of Cups, I think it means coming together to build towards an emotional goal. So that's kind of reflective of like the overall meaning of like what is the safe space, girly space of the women's washroom. So then it like kind of ties it all together in a little bow. But if you looked at it without knowing what the cup said or just thinking that it was a small visual detail, you could just appreciate it still, and you could still come to that conclusion of like that's the mood or energy that you get from the painting. But I like that if you do want to spend time and look at the tiny details, you could find little things like that.
And how do these personal symbols serve as a bridge between your experiences and what you want the viewer to interpret?
Sometimes the symbols I feel like are not so much for the viewer as they are for me. A lot of the times when they're very personal details, they're things that I just want in there that I know are there. So that I can connect to it in a way that maybe like not the average audience can. So if they know me and if they know certain details of my life, they might be like, oh my God, no way. But it is a little bit more discreet. And I think like Taylor Swift can't get away with it because people know her life and know her life story in every detail.
Yes.
So the fans search and they find the things and they're like, oh my gosh, no way. But I'm sure initially she put in things just for her and didn't think anyone would find them. So I definitely have some elements like that where I will add, like in one of my paintings, I have a couple in an aerial view of a couple in bed. And I have that the fitted sheet, like the fitted sheet is off of the corner of the bed. And for me, like that was something that I was like, you know what, let me take the fitted sheet off the corner of the bed because it's significant to me for whatever reason. But that's not something that anyone's going to see as necessarily intentional, but I'm going to know that like that has a personal significance to me. Stuff like that, like little small details that it's like, okay, this is for me because this is art that I'm making to express emotions. So the art is serving the purpose of emotional, personal expression. So part of that is me kind of putting in these small details that are further sending or further connecting to my memories or to my experiences. And maybe as a collective of all the little details coming together, it does tell a story or it does give an impact. but maybe it's missed on the viewer, and that's okay.
When you start a new piece, what's the first emotion or story that you want to capture, and how does that evolve as you work?
I think it depends on the piece. There's certain ones where for example, sometimes I'll work from my like journal, like I'll do a little bit of a prompt and then pull things from there. Or sometimes I'll just have an idea that comes from wherever and I just write it in my notes app and then think about how I can portray it. And I think a lot of the time it starts with a plan. I'm pretty plan oriented. So I will make a mock-up. I'll try to edit as much as I can ahead of time on Photoshop, on my computer, see what it's going to kind of look like. And then a lot of it gets shifted or changes or evolves as I go through the concept creation process. So once I start to take the reference photos, maybe like the angle I had in my head is actually not making sense for that reference model, or it just doesn't look as good as another angle. So like some of the photography will influence it. Then if I really like that and I start to play with the colors, sometimes when I'm shifting the colors or happy accidents are happening, that will, I feel like, change the overall impression or the mood of it. And then I'll have to sometimes go back to the beginning and do a little bit of like revision of like, okay, I wanted to get across this meaning with this painting. As I've been doing it, it's kind of giving me more of this feeling. Do I want to do something about that? Or do I want to kind of lean into that and shift and adjust and kind of let the process make an impact as well?
So you mentioned taking reference photos and prompting in your journal and using Photoshop. What does your process look like when you're translating a complex emotion or idea into a visual form?
It definitely can be tricky sometimes because I do rely so heavily on reference photos. It's hard sometimes to think, okay, what does this emotion look like? And how can I create that scene in real life? Not just, I think a lot of artists who do a lot more work from their imagination or a little bit more like made up concepts, you can do a bit more with that in terms of drawing emotions than when I work with scenes and real people and from a photograph. Trying to like recreate it feels a little bit sometimes like performance art, like putting it together.
Right. Yeah.
So I think for me, there's certain emotions that I'll feel are connected to a memory. Those ones are always a little bit easier because then I can just kind of treat it similar to like cinema, how they use different lighting and sound, and they mix that together to create a feeling in a scene that you're watching someone experience that feeling. So sometimes if it's associated with a memory or I feel like it goes well with a certain moment or story, I'll just create that story and then try to use those colors and those lighting tricks to amp up that emotion and bring it to the forefront. Other times I'll feel like, how on earth am I going to capture this very like nuanced, small emotion or message into a scene? And that's when I have to get a little bit more creative with it. Like I did a painting called Hold On, that I read this book by Megan Nolan, I think is her name, called Acts of Desperation. And it really resonated, sadly, because that is like the most unflattering self-portrayal in a book of all time. But it really resonated. I was like, oh my gosh, it's so honest. It's honest that it's almost like hard to read because you're like, you're not supposed to say that out loud, you know? But it's this girl and it's like in a diary sense where she is kind of talking through what she has been through or what she's actively going through. And she's just being very, very honest about how she's feeling. And it's not cute. And so it makes sense that it's called Acts of Desperation. And I read that book just before I went to make this painting that I had made. And I had written a journal entry about feeling like I had lost part of myself and was becoming very fun and easy. And in becoming fun and easy, I was losing like so much more to myself. Just kind of feeling like I got really watered down and like found like I was becoming more digestible and less of myself.
Interesting.
And so when I was reading that book, I really resonated with a lot of things that the first person character was saying. And one of them, there's like a quote in it where she said that she was basically begging this guy that she was seeing at the time to want her in the way she wanted him, and saying, she gave like a list. She like did a little soliloquy kind of that, saying that she would be as dull as a spoon, as dull but as useful as a spoon if that's what he wanted. And she would say something like that. And I was just like, oh, I love that kind of thing. Like, it just like really resonated the way she wrote it. I was like, wow, that's so beautiful, but also so sad. Mm-hmm. And so when I went to make the painting, I was like, I want to create or like explain or express that feeling of feeling like you lost yourself fitting in the space that someone else needs, or like, you know, adjusting to accommodate another person. And so I ended up coming up with the idea of, I wanted it to have some kind of element of like tension and almost like possessiveness to it, but at the same time, so that you're losing the person, like the subject is getting lost in it. And so what I did is I asked my friend Tyler to help me out, and he sat through a very uncomfortable reference photo shoot with me. But I set up a camera and I stood in front of him and just had him place like his hands on multiple parts of my body until I was like, had enough shots that I could edit together so I could take myself fully out of it and then just make the, like, what's that word? The shadow, or like the outline, silhouette. Right. Yeah. The silhouette of the main person in the front only exists as a silhouette that you can only see by the hands and arms of the person holding onto them. If that makes sense.
Yes.
It's kind of hard to explain.
No, you explained it great.
Thank you. But yeah, so that's an example of when I didn't really feel like there was a moment to show that emotion, like without making it such like a whole comic book strip, you know, like it was like, and a lot goes into that. So that one is one that's a bit more representative, where it's not a scene, it's not a memory or a moment in time. It's like a feeling that you're portraying by doing a little bit of editing behind the scenes and showing that kind of more imaginary scene. So that takes a lot of, whenever I do that, it's always a lot of editing, a lot of pre-editing and adjusting. But yeah.
Creating art around uncomfortable emotions like this, that must be so challenging. How do you find the courage to like delve into these personal topics?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't necessarily see it as courage. I appreciate you saying that, and not to be self-deprecating. It's just that I was not necessarily, when I started doing that with my art, I was coming from a place of like a recovering oversharer kind of vibe. So it wasn't like I was pushing myself out of my comfort zone to like overshare. It was like, this is the like baseline. Like, I've been venting, I've been doing this. Now I feel like I'm a little bit further removed from that. I'm like out of the place I was in, where there was a time where I was painting things as I was experiencing them. Like, I'm processing an emotion and I'm like using it really, really as an outlet in that moment to kind of express and to process and to even understand, like, what am I feeling right now? Mm-hmm. And at that time, it felt like what I had to do. Like, it felt like a necessity. It really felt like a coping mechanism. And so me painting those difficult emotions it was not a stretch or like a push for me to do. It was something that I just felt like I needed to do, like needed to get out. And also was all I was thinking about. Like, it was constantly, people will say like, you're a person, not a self-improvement project, but it's definitely really easy to get into the headspace of just like, how can I do better? How can I fix this? Especially when you're not happy with where you're at. Mm-hmm. And so I think I was a little self-absorbed at the time. My headspace was very focused on what I had gone through, what I was going through, and like what it meant and everything like that. So with that, I had basically just done what felt natural. And that was making these paintings that were pretty heavy. And it felt a little weird at first because I was so used to accommodating the like saleability of a painting and making more commercial work. Right. So to switch gears and go towards like painting these like depressing little scenes sometimes felt like, well, what am I going to do with this? So it really had to be for me. At the time it had to be for me because I was not thinking about it being for other people, because if I was, I don't think I would have picked that subject matter at all. Now that I'm further from it, it sometimes feels a little weird once I go to like paint things in line with the series that's like very heavy emotionally. I'm just like, oh, like sometimes I'll feel a little like sad for that person, or I'll be like, oh my gosh, because I'm like further removed now. But yeah, it definitely was more of the just natural thing that felt like it needed to just get out. So it did.
And in processing these emotions through your art, have you discovered anything surprising about yourself or your artistic voice?
I think that it validated for me that it's important for me that like I would consider myself a meaning maker of things. And I think it really validated that that's something that's important to me. And even when I was in places where I didn't feel like I had much control over myself or my actions or what I was doing or how I was feeling, that I had the drive to make meaning out of it. And I think that that's also how I found myself in certain situations that were causing like this pull to do that, is I just felt like the whole idea of like having an experience that you just needed to walk away from that didn't have meaning, or that didn't have a purpose, or I couldn't spin in a way of like, oh, well, this is growth. Like there's no reason for it. That just didn't sit right with me. And I think that's what really pulled me to paint and paint and paint and try to make art out of harder situations and out of hard times. And yeah, it's just validated for me now that that is something that's important to me. And I can see that like at any stage, even when like I have, how like as you are in a tough place or as you're not at 100, things get let go of. You don't have 100% capacity. So you maybe cleaning your room goes out the door or whatever it is, like you slowly lose the things that are not of higher value to you, and you hold on to what you need to hold on to in those times. And I think it really showed me that making meaning of things and expressing myself and feeling understood is very high on my list of like needs. So my little triangle of needs, it's like
your Maslow hierarchy.
Exactly. It's deep down there. And so it really showed me that like that's very important to me. And so now I know, as I'm out of these phases, that was something that even when I was not like taking care of myself in the way I needed to, I took time to make meaning of things, to try to make an effort to feel more understood, to connect with people in this way. And I think that that's really cool to see in myself. That's something that was important to me, even at the lows. So now that I'm at my highs, like, I think it's really important to hold on and to remember that is so important to me as a low bottom of the triangle.
And how do you navigate the vulnerability of sharing deeply personal work with the public? Because painting in and of itself is already an incredibly vulnerable thing to partake in, or let alone when you're painting subjects like how you do. So how do you manage that?
I don't know. I find it's like, sometimes it's like when you maybe would sing for a stranger, but not in front of your friend.
Right.
I think it's similar to that sometimes like when I put out work, I feel like there's power in anonymity. So if I'm showing it to someone who doesn't really know me, I'm like, well, they don't know me, so it's fine. It's trickier definitely showing my work to people who do know me on a very personal basis. Sometimes like I won't want to, I'll like undersell this sometimes what it's about. Like when I feel like there is that like degrees of connection, I'm like, oh, like now it feels like so intense. And if I tell you how intense it is, then are you going to think I'm okay? Like I feel more comfortable sometimes just speaking about it and like being as honest about all the hidden meanings or about all the things I wanted to portray with it with a stranger who doesn't know me, because it just feels like low risk, high reward situation.
Sure.
It's definitely still something that I am working towards getting more comfortable, not underplaying. I think in general, a lot of girls do this, but also just people in general. It's like so easy to be like, oh, it's not that serious, or just like, oh, my silly little art. I like to throw little in front of everything. And I'm like, why did I call it little? So I think it's definitely more of my comfort zone to when I'm speaking to people who know me on a personal basis to like undersell or to be like, oh, it's not that serious, or, oh, it's just a thing I wanted to make. I don't know why I made it. Where when I am speaking to like a stranger who just wants to appreciate the art for what it is, at that point, I feel more motivated to be like, well, no, the art has this meaning. And because you're not looking at me and I don't feel as much in the spotlight as a person and it's more about the piece, I'm like, no, well, let me tell you exactly what the piece means. So I think that's maybe the difference is like when it's people I know, I feel in the spotlight. But when it's people I don't know, I feel like the art's more in the spotlight.
A lot of your art explores themes of femininity and youth. I'm curious, how do you decide which moments or emotions to immortalize in your art?
It's definitely tough. Like there's lots to pick from. I think usually it just comes from a place of whatever idea I'm most excited about. I get pretty like giddy in the lead up to a painting. I get very attached to an idea. Like I hear different artists say like, don't fall in love with it until you're done. But I am like in love with it as I'm doing it. And then I'm in love with it for a little bit after. And then usually as I move on to the next thing, I'm like, I could go without it. So it's got like a little shelf life for me of like when it's just my full focus and I'm so excited about it. So for me, it just really depends on what idea I think is like the most exciting. And I get kind of tunnel vision-y. So if there is an idea that's come across my mind and I'm like, oh, that's so cute, I usually feel like I need to hurry. Like I feel like it does have a shelf life. I feel like after a set amount of time, I can only be excited about it for so long. So when I do get an idea and I'm excited enough about it, I think it's just my personality is set up that I'm pretty quick to be like, okay, let me start doing this. Let me make it happen. And then there's other ideas that kind of sit on the back burner for a long time. And if I kind of rediscover them or find a different reason why they have now become more exciting, then they'll make it up. But usually it's pretty as they come up. I'm a bit impulsive that way, that it's like idea comes up, goes in the notes app. If it sits in the notes app for 5 weeks, it might die. Or I see it again in my notes app one day and I'm like, okay, let's do it now. It sometimes makes it, sometimes doesn't. But usually pretty shortly after the idea forms, I start trying to make moves in that direction. And then once I feel committed to it. If I've put any effort into it, then I've put effort into it. And now I'm set, But I need to like put that first brush stroke down, like get the reference photo done, some kind of like commitment of effort or time, and then it's like locked in.
In portraying themes of femininity, how do you balance your personal reflection with broader social commentary?
It's always tricky because I think I can feel a little selfish when I am just like painting always for me, but trying to also present it at shows. So it's like, there is part of me that's like, okay, well, if you're really just painting for you, what's the need? What's the need to then share it? And I think the need to share it comes from that desire to connect. And in that desire to connect, you have to see something of yourself in other people and feel that they would see something of themselves in what you're doing. So I think that there is definitely a pull to make things that I feel like will resonate with other people. And I don't think it's too hard to find that. I think any experience you have as an individual, the odds that it's a unique experience are sadly low. Like I think we all have a bit of a bias where we think we're more unique than we are. And I feel like every time I visit TikTok, I get a slap in the face. I'm like, oh, I'm living the same life as everyone else. So a lot of the times when I do have some kind of emotional experience I want to convey or some feminine nuance that I think is unique to me, just one conversation could pop my bubble of like, oh, wait, like a lot of girls can relate to this. Like if I, as a 24-year-old girl, am going through something, 24-year-old, like all the 28-year-olds are like, yeah, we've been there, you know? So I just think that it's pretty hard to find something that's personal, that's not also has potential to be universal.
Right.
You know? So it's not too much of an effort to bridge that gap, but I do definitely look at the experiences of other people or take inspiration from my friends, my family, and just people on the internet too. And if they're speaking about a concept, sometimes that gets, you know, as a little inspo into some of the things that I want to explore in myself and others.
I'd like to talk a bit about the narrative aspects of your painting and how do the lighting and color choice play into the emotional depth of your narratives?
I definitely think it makes a big difference. There's a few paintings where I've accidentally found that the mood is not what I wanted it to be, and it's the fault of whatever color choice I've made. So it has a lot of power that goes into it. Like I did a painting called Still that was of a girl in bed, and the bed kind of transitions into water. So it's kind of like that feeling of when you're so stuck in bed that it's like you're basically floating, you know, like you're deep, deep, deep in it. And with that one, I did it in all blues. And in doing that, it definitely gave a very cold and a little bit sad energy, which is what I wanted for that one. But there's definitely other paintings where I've gone to paint a certain concept and picked the color maybe based off of what just was the color of in the picture or whatever reason. And then as I'm painting it, I'm like, oh, this looks sad. And it's not what I'm going for. So there's definitely a lot of powerful things that colors can do. Like when you use cool tones, it does a lot to change the mood. And I think everyone inherently knows, even people who aren't in art or aren't practicing visual artists, you know, just as a human, like the feeling you get when you're in a cozy, warm lit room versus the feeling you get in like a hospital with the fluorescent lighting. Yeah. It's very, very different. And by adjusting those things, you can take the exact same composition from being a cozy, cute scene to something that looks almost chilling and creepy. So I like to do a lot of playing ahead of time online and in mock-ups before I do my paintings to try and get the colors how I want them. Because sometimes it is hard to anticipate if you just go in with color on the canvas and you've never seen it that way. Like if you're working on a reference photo that is, say, in just neutral lighting and you plan on making it a different color, sometimes you don't know what that color is going to change about the meaning until you really see it. So I like to try and see it ahead of time and plan accordingly because, yeah, when you add a little pink, it goes a long way.
And when translating these personal experiences into art, how do you decide which elements to emphasize through, let's say, posture or facial expressions?
Yeah, I think with those things, it's tricky. It's like based on the emotion. If it's a very, very strong emotion, like very intense, and the emotion is the focus of the piece, I'll ask my reference model to try and make certain facial expressions. But I do feel like, again, just as humans, I think there's certain things, like the same way I feel like people have a general higher interest in faces than maybe other objects, just like your human brain likes to look at faces because we're humans.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things that like we really are great at picking up quickly and like using to fill in visual cues and to understand things. And one of those is facial expressions. So whenever you do add a facial expression that's like away from neutral to a painting, it instantly changes the energy, the feeling, the meaning of the painting so much because your eye automatically like gravitates and starts interpreting what that means. Just from like being a human who's used to trying to understand like, oh, are you upset today? You know, with the people around you. So I try to only use facial expressions if it's very much a scene I want to like convey a very clear emotion, because that will take it away from you. When I do want it to be a bit more subtle, that's when I'll tend to go for bodily postures and have, like, you can have a sadness or a feeling of kind of like reservedness or maybe a little bit down, a little bit just shyer by having someone kind of close in their frame and like hunch over a little bit. Like that will come through the same way that a facial expression gets interpreted, but it leaves a little bit more room for ambiguity. So I find like it's similar to like when you watch contemporary dance and they use their bodies to kind of express an emotion and you don't even need to see their face. Like you're on like your back on whatever seat you're in and you don't have maybe access to see their facial expression, but you can kind of get what the energy is based on how they hold themselves. But it leaves a little bit more room for interpretation. So it's not like in your face. So that's why, unless the emotion's like the focus of the piece and I want it to be so crystal clear, I'll try to tend towards posture over expression.
And how do you decide when a piece is finished, especially when dealing with these personal themes?
Sometimes I really just get tired. Sometimes it's not more than that. I only have a set attention span, I feel like, for each piece. Sometimes it just feels like that's enough of that. So with the sizes I work with, I find I usually end up taking around 100 hours max. Sometimes it goes a little above that, but usually around 100 hours on a piece. I find every single time when I notice like, okay, I feel like it's done enough, or I'm feeling over it, if I check my hour count, it's like hitting that same threshold.
Wow.
So yeah, I think that part of it is just my attention span. Part of it is like the amount of effort I want to put into each piece and the time length that it takes. But another part of it is just sometimes it feels done and sometimes it doesn't. And I don't know what that is in a painting, but I know that like I'm a person who keeps very high standards for themselves. So I won't let it go until I feel like it's done. So if I have even like a kind of vibe or like itching feeling that, oh, like I'm not quite happy with that, or I feel like I need something else, like I'm more of a have trouble leaving well enough alone than preemptively stopping. So yeah, I'll definitely just finish it until I'm happy with it. And then when I'm happy with it, I'm happy with it. But
is it difficult for you to let go of your paintings?
some of them, there's definitely some that have like a special significance to me where I'm like, oh my gosh, someone else owning it. But most of the time, no. I think that a lot of artists have more trouble than I do. In general, like when I hear artists talk about giving away their painting, they're like, no, my baby. I'm like, no, buy it. Take it.
Yeah.
Have it. And I think some of that maybe just comes from like when I was working and living in Toronto, I just didn't have the space for my paintings. So anytime I would finish a painting, instantly I would message my friends and say, okay, who wants to hold on to this one? And so they wouldn't just be around all the time. I would kind of send them out for babysitting pretty frequently. But in general, I think ever since the dawn of taking photos, I don't feel like I need to have the original with me for too long. Like I get to sit with it during the creation process. I hold on to it for usually a few months after. And then if it goes, I have pictures. I know it existed and that's good enough for me. It's more of a get it out and get it gone.
And in aiming to elicit empathy rather than striving for uniqueness, how do you ensure that your art remains authentic to your voice?
I think part of what I try to do with that is just to make sure that it's very honest, similarly to what I said about that one book, in sometimes an unflattering way. I think if I ever find myself trying to like rewrite something or like make it a little bit like cuter or try to package it up, I always feel a little bit bleh about that. So I think in general, it's just trying to portray things as honestly as possible. And if that is not a good look, then it's not a good look, but it's honest to what that feeling was. And it's not everything that I make is about myself or about those experiences. So there's lots of room to create concepts that are just imaginary or just a thought or a story that's outside of myself. And that's kind of where I give more space for that kind of exploration and coming up with those more aesthetically pleasing ideas or adjusting as needed. But when it comes to like portraying my own life or my own feelings, I think I feel so motivated by the idea of getting it right and like feeling like, yes, that's it. Kind of like matching the emotion and recognizing it in my own work, that I don't feel like it's such a struggle to try to be authentic, because that's just like, it's similar to when I paint a face and I'm really trying to capture the resemblance. And the motivation isn't to make the prettiest face. It's to make the face that that person has.
Right.
And when you do that, you start to like it really shifts for you what you maybe would consider flaws. And I feel like anyone who's ever done a self-portrait, I feel like it's a very good exercise for like self-compassion and for self-esteem in general, because you really do shift away from wanting it to look better to wanting it to look like you, because you want people to recognize that it's you. And the art's a higher quality if people can see and say, that's definitely your face. Right. So if you're trying to like make your nose smaller, your lips bigger, it's like, well, now your art's not as good because it doesn't look like you. I think it's just similar. So it's like whenever I try to paint an emotion that I've experienced, if I end up like shifting it or trying to make it less ugly, and then I look at it after, I would just probably feel like, well, I didn't get it right. So yeah, there's a lot of focus on getting it just right.
I'd like to shift topics slightly here and wondering if you can tell us about, was there a defining moment when you realized that your art was moving from hobby or side hustle to be more of a central part of your career?
I think that for me, a big part of even the term side hustle or calling it a hobby, or even like the need to differentiate between what those are and call it and label it something, came from a place of not feeling comfortable with the title of being an artist or taking myself too seriously. So I think it was a lot easier to really lean into the commercial side or be like, this is a side hustle, this is for money, this is whatever it is, instead of looking at it as this is something that I want to do and pursue in a serious way, whether that's for money or for expression or for whatever motivation you have tied up into it. I think it was just like, that's the difference, I think, for me, is saying like, oh, it's a side hustle. Or when I first started painting, again, what got me, which I'm grateful for because it got me back into painting. And that's something that I have really loved doing now. But I started it by offering to paint people's nudes because I loved doing like those figurative classes where they have a nude model and you draw for a set amount of time or work on painting. And I really like just the human body, like the curves of it, painting those things. I just find it very satisfying in general. So I knew that that was something I had interest in. I felt like it was a skill set I had. And I don't think at the time I felt comfortable with the idea of saying like, I want to make things for myself, or I want to make things that have personal significance or any kind of emotional significance, or art that's even for me, or art that I want to connect with others or say something. I didn't want to say anything with my art. And so at that time, I knew that I wanted to like use the skills. I knew I wanted to practice. I knew I wanted to like engage in that hobby, but was not comfortable with any of the serious side of it. And so by kind of marketing it that way of like, oh, I'll paint your nudes, like do it for money, it's a side hustle, it was really just detracting from any personal connection to it. And so at the time, like, it was good for practice and it was good for developing skills, but I definitely did not feel the same way I do now about my current paintings as I did then. I would be happy with them in terms of a technical sense or in terms of like small business perspective, like feeling like I put out a good product. But I would feel like I would even say to the people who commissioned me, like, oh, for your painting, like I would not even call them my paintings. It would be like, these are paintings I'm making for a person and it's their painting. And it just was so, and like people would say, like send long messages about, oh, I feel so touched, or like, this is what it meant to me. And I'd be like, that's so cool. And it would feel like they were the only one who had a meaning in it, or like it was for them, therefore it was not for me to have meaning, or it wasn't for me to put in myself into or put anything else into it, because it was theirs. And it was for them to look at and reflect on and feel however they wanted to feel about it. And so I think in doing that helped me get back to where I am now, where I do feel more serious about it and I do take it more seriously. And whether I continue to pursue it as a monetary career or just hobby in the sense that it's not something that I'm selling, but I am committing a certain amount of time to. With that, I just think that there's more of I have more comfort around feeling like, no, I want to make art and I want to make what I want to make, and doing so much of that kind of, this isn't actually art, it's just a thing for fun. Doing that over and over again will help push you away from it for sure. Like,
right.
You know, if after you do it for a while, like part of you, like the part of you that wants to be creative, that wants a creative outlet, and that's why you started doing this, will start to scream, you know, will start to be like, hey, what's going on? Because we were supposed to be creative, but this doesn't feel like our thing anymore. And that's why I had to kind of move away from that and start rediscovering what I wanted to make and just get more comfortable telling people like, hey, I want to make this for me, and not hiding behind any kind of shield of, oh, well, I made it because someone asked me to, or it means this to them, but I just painted it.
Reflecting on your experiences, what changes or developments would you like to see in the Canadian art?
I think that for me, one of my a little bit qualms with the art scene in general, when I like look through galleries and stuff, is that there definitely is a pull, and I think it's promoted in fine art schools a lot too, to making a bunch of stuff that's so conceptual and so modern that it loses a lot of, I feel like, connection with viewers, or the viewers that do connect with it they're not me. They're someone who's like, you know, really knows their art theory and can look super deep and find the meaning in things, or maybe has had the opportunity to speak with the artist and explain it more, but stuff that's just so conceptual. And yeah, it's just like stuff that looks like, well, where would it exist besides in this gallery? Or, you know, where do you get to appreciate it outside of that? And I feel like with social media, it's nice that every artist has that kind of opportunity these days to self-represent beyond just what the galleries offer. You can obviously work with galleries, but you have that platform to show off your work and to make your own niche and to connect with your own audience. And in a way that's a lot more approachable, I think. So I would like in the future, I feel like, just to have a little bit more diversity when it comes to what's being shown in gallery spaces and in really formal spaces. There's definitely some variety, but I feel like when you look through, the overwhelming theme you see is like super modern conceptual art. Lots of textural things. Textiles are really, and I actually love textiles though, so I can't just the textiles, but just so much like abstract conceptual stuff is happening at all these shows that I wish there was just a little bit more of a mix. And I think when you go online and you look at art online, you can find so much, and you find the stuff that's more like figurative, or you find the things that are maybe more traditional, or something that's very nostalgic and very kind of more cutesy. And I don't think that doesn't have a space in more formal art as well. I think that you can have both, and it doesn't need to all be in one aesthetic. And so I just think that in the future, I hope that variety that exists online helps motivate wherever. I don't know what the future is for galleries or where that's headed. I think that like the existence of online spaces obviously shifts things so drastically. And I don't know what, like, I'm sure people who are working within galleries have a better idea in museums of like what that looks like and how they think that industry is going to pivot and shift over time. But I hope that one of the things that happens is that you just have a little bit more diversity about what is accepted into galleries, and that some of it could be a little bit more approachable and not as like highbrow as it is at the moment.
And speaking of galleries, I would like to talk about what's currently happening for you and what's next, because you have a lot of shows and residency. So what can you tell us about all of this?
Honestly, I'm still so excited about all of it. It all came together so last minute. Like even from the time you asked me to do this to the time you asked me more questions about it, I had nothing going on, and then now I have things going on. I was like, what's next? I don't know, like lunch. But yeah, so I just had the show at a Abbozzo Gallery called Girl Dinner that I was so looking forward to. They asked me to be part of that back in, I think, November. And I instantly was like, okay, let me clear my schedule, because I wanted to make all these themed pieces that are about girlhood and feminine indulgences and all those things that the theme circulates around that I just think you do not get to see. For example, what I feel like you don't often get to see in galleries, like girlhood in a gallery, like what? So I was so excited about that one and got to work right away for that. I just had that opening night where I saw you on Friday the 26th of January, and that was, I could not have asked for that night. It was so better. It was so cute. I loved seeing all the girls with, like bows in their hair and like little ballet flats, and like everyone was just, the energy in there was so good. And even I talked to one of the director's husband. I was speaking to him, and he was like, yeah, the energy in here is just different tonight. I was like, yeah, because obviously the girls brought it. Like, what do you mean? So that was so cool and so fun. And I got to make some really cool connections and meet really cool, nice people. Like, people were so friendly at that event. Maybe because I had a name tag, but I just felt like, wow, people are really talking to me. But it was really nice. And then shortly after that event, I ended up joining in on the group exhibition at Crybaby for the month of March, because that's International Women's Day month. They're doing a show that's all women called No Man's Land, which I think is such a cute little title for that. I love a good title. So I was just like, yes, of course. And some super talented artists are in that, and artists that I like geek out on looking at their Instagrams. Like, so I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be part of that group. It feels like the in-girl group. And then after that, I have in May, art residency with the Pouch Co Foundation. And that's connected with James Baird Gallery. And so that's in Newfoundland for the month of May. I've never done an art residency, so I am absolutely thrilled. And like the fact that it's like an invite-only residency feels so cool. Like, I feel awesome. So that was super, super cool when he asked. It was so casual too when he asked. He like DM'd me on Instagram and was just like, oh yeah, do you want to do this? There's a spot. It's yours if you want it.
That's like, great.
Are you serious? So that's something to look forward to. And then it works out because I was not sure how I was going to get a painting to Newfoundland, because I'm going to be part of their All Women Again show in September that they're doing. And it's a big, big show. There's like 50 plus artists in it. I haven't seen the space in person because it's all the way out there, but it must be huge because that's a lot of paintings. So yeah, I'm going to be part of that show in September. And so I'll probably work on that while I'm at the residency and just leave it there so that I can have a big piece that I don't have to ship across Canada.
So Katie, where can everyone find your work?
Well, you can find me online if you want to peruse through my socials. I'm on TikTok at katiebutler.art. I'm also on Instagram at katiebutler.art, and my website is katiebutler.art. And then you can just look out. I'll keep posting if there's anything else, any other opportunities that come up and places to see my art. You know, I will let you know on my socials.
We love it. Well, Katie, thank you so much for being here today. It was an absolute pleasure. And I think I can speak for all of us and say that we are really looking forward to see what you are doing next.
Thanks for having me. It's been very fun.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on ArtBeat, where the stories of Canadian art come to life. Follow us on Instagram at ArtBeat Podcast for exclusive content and previews of what's to come. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to stay updated with our journey through the world of Canadian art. Enjoyed the episode? Leave a review or recommend us to a fellow art enthusiast. Together, let's keep the conversation going and deepen our connection to the diverse world of Canadian art. See you next time.